So I'd like to thank you, Robert Adam, for your fascinating and challenging talk. And it's with greatest admiration, I'd like to also express my gratitude for all you have achieved to empower and strengthen our international community of traditional architects and urbanists. Thank you also to Nicholas Boyd-Smith for his admirable and really, really strong work in the United Kingdom, which I think is really, really ready to go internationally, because I heard there were a lot of comments, a lot of people trying to get your files, get this intelligence to kind of apply and implement it in other countries. It is my great pleasure now and privilege to introduce Professor James McCrery and a remarkable group of panelists for the today session. I've tagged for two, and I know that the name has changed, but I'm kind of slow in adjusting to change, so my apologies for that. Professor James McCrery joins us from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., where he is the Director of Classical Architecture Studies at the School of Architecture and Planning. He's also a practicing architect and is a member of the US Commission of the Fine Arts. And you have seen his picture for a while, and also his bio. And let me just quickly, what I find so interesting, I mean, James has a little bit, the bio is a little bit what many of us have experienced. So being trained in the modernist and formalist design and theory, and then kind of experimenting with postmodernism, maybe the constructivism, and then in some way experiencing this moment of enlightenment, you know, and kind of getting to rethink and adopt classical and traditional architecture. And I think this is really so important also for younger professionals to understand that education and learning is not a linear path. And it's something, it's not a line to go from ignorance to truth or knowledge and wisdom. It's really an ongoing process. It's a complicated road sometimes.
Yes.
I can't move my, oh yeah, okay, sorry, moving, yeah. So James, as I said, a practitioner of classical traditional architecture, an admirable, wonderful portfolio, and in his biography, in his website, he kind of speaks about his expertise in design of traditional Catholic churches. So the Proxy Cathedral, so there are so many wonderful private projects, also institutional or residences, where you can see a great inventiveness, imagination, but also careful interest in detail, interiors, landscape, and so on. Now, the panelists, so James will run, he will moderate, and the panelists, so I'm starting with Zeynep Iqbal. She joins us from London, where she studied at the Princess Foundation in the School of Traditional Arts and Architecture. She's originally a Turkish architect that had a lot of experience. She studied in Vienna, worked in Germany, and also in Istanbul before coming back to the United Kingdom, where she established her office. And she was awarded, she was awarded the Iqbal Excellence Award for Emerging Talent for her design of the Turkish Culture Center, and presented at the Iqbal World Congress. Now, you see and admire, you know, the very exquisite artwork which she produces, and you know, and where she often produces her own color. It's all handmade and kind of hand carved, and so, and it has it really goes and expresses higher standards of craftsmanship and of kind of creative intelligence. Now, Zeynep, she talks about her passion. So she really has a passion for cultural arts, which she kind of experienced both in Turkey and in Europe, in Berlin and United Kingdom. And then she kind of mentions also this situation for young professionals. So what's kind of the life of young professionals, the challenges for young professionals, and she have commissioned installation interventions throughout the United Kingdom, but still. She still feels that her work is in a niche, and kind of She has to do compromises, and then finally concludes that what really is the power she has is that she remains, it's the ethics, it's the integrity, it's the honesty and the quality of the work, which in some way allows her to kind of maintain and to continue to persevere. So I wanted Nia volunteered to step out of the panel. I wanted still to give an homage to Nia. I've been working with Nia, so we know each other for a long time, but we haven't really worked together. So we have been Zooming every day, and it was just really, really fantastic to see the energy, the kind of intelligence, and also I think the tech savviness. So Nia always complains about not being updated, but he's really, really good at running the technology. And as he mentioned several times, we are not funded. So this is all volunteer work, and we have been really, this was very, very crafty, all the things we did. So Nia is an architect and planner based in Washington, and 30 years of experience in a large and complex project and so on. And then he also then did this fantastic and beautiful book, The Art of Classic Planning, and he offers to everyone who has the book to bring the signature to sign it. Now, some of the work, so this master planning process, which I kind of experienced a little bit, which I find really fascinating, is very original, very interesting. A 100-year-old plan for various places, and presently working in Haiti and Jerusalem, and some of his illustrations, which are really exquisite and very inspiring. So, and as he mentioned in the presentation of the Institute, is that architecture and urbanism cannot be separated. You cannot have brutalist architecture and good urbanism. You have to have architecture is a dimension, it's just a scale of urbanism, and urbanism is a scale of architecture. So you can't just kind of go in different philosophies when you kind of work. Now, Mark Wilson-Jones from London, Apollodorus architect, and Mark, he really draws his inspiration from antiquity, from antique architecture, and actually makes me think of one of the French encyclopedians who said, if you want to understand the essence of something, you have to go back, you have to return to origin. So just this kind of effort people did in Renaissance to go back to the origin, work on the really kind of roots of classical architecture, and actually Mark has done a lot of research. He has done very beautiful books which have been awarded, and they have been really celebrated, and they are still really, they have become new classics of the classical tradition. Mark also addresses placemaking, sustainability, the carbon challenge, so environmental issues, and kind of tries also to find the right compromises. So working with modern technology, working with digital and handcraft, but then, you know, what he does in the morning, Sunday morning in particular. So today, I guess he was sitting at his breakfast table doing some beautiful sketches, watercolors. So he's working on a villa in Antigua. So, and kind of goes to Pompeii, measures building, and kind of draws from the frescoes, and then creating this just quite amazing architecture, in new architecture, which is beautifully crafted, beautifully detailed, and with ornament, and also another drawing. And then here you see the bathhouse villa in Atlar by Apollodorus architects. Nicolas, he has presented himself, but I just go quickly through it. So the logo, and so these are, I think I need to mention that many of the drawings he has shown, also Nia has shown, are from Francis Terry. So that's so great, the young professional, the son of Prince Terry, is very, very active in this grassroots and this kind of really activism, you know, to kind of provide local populations with new imagery and new paradigms. For Stefano Serafini from Italy, and Stefano is not an architect. He's a journalist, a philosopher, psychologist, and interestingly, he's a publisher, Artena Anarchist Press. I like these anarchist things coming up here and there. And then he has an organization, international organization of biourbanism. And I think what's so interesting is they have a number of publications, very interesting conferences, and they run a fantastic summer school in Athena, which is a beautiful place in the Rome area. So if people are interested, I think that's something really to consider, to get more involved with biophilia, neuroscience, hands-on experience, craftsmanship. And this was, for example, the theme of the 2019 summer school, designing a home of language. And the interest in the fractal, the nature fractal, and then this kind of slogan, architecture is a common good. So architecture belongs to everybody. It's not something which should only be beneficial to an elite. Brandon Rowe from Utah Valley University, an award-winning architect, leader, educator, 6 years experience and so on, and plenty of awards and qualifications. And I think what's really interesting, another new program, which I think is very encouraging, another new program of traditional and classical architecture at the Utah Valley University. So I think that's something I find so challenging, so interesting. And Brandon is also interested in the interconnectivity between architecture, culture, and spirituality. Of his work, so also you see interest in detail, ornaments, so the logo of the firm. And then you see, yeah, so objectives, referring back to what we have heard yesterday so magnificently. So this interest in nature patterns, and also the help we get from contemporary science, from neuroscience, which kind of in some way confirms a lot of the things we knew, but we didn't have the scientific evidence, we didn't have the scientific arguments, but now we have that. But also this kind of interest in the body healing, the spiritual aspect, so the holistic approach to architecture, which in some way opposes consumerism and the pure technological and kind of abstraction of the architectural profession. Mark Ferguson, yeah, some of this beautiful detail drawing. And Mark Ferguson, he joins us from the Catholic University of America, where he's the new dean, which is another really amazing and very, very encouraging development. And he has a firm with, so he founded Ferguson Charmanian Architects since in 1988, so some time ago, with 90 people, projects in 23 states and 5 countries, primary focus, design of private residence, including city apartments, townhouses, suburban houses. And so of which you can see some examples, they are all really magnificent. And I think they all kind of, again, confirm this interest, nature, biophilia, neuroscience, humanism. And yeah, so extraordinary. And yeah, so, oh, okay. So from site plan, so what I found really so interesting, so site plan, landscaping, detailing, interiors, everything is very, very nicely masterfully done, and it's just really gorgeous. Now, Mark is giving us really a very promise, I would say, reaffirmed university's role to teach. And so I made some notes here for teaching, because many people pretend to teach, but they're not doing it. So teaching meaning educate responsibly, empower and inspire students, not to give them a top-down, not indoctrination or discouragement. So I think teaching as a noble activity, teaching architecture as a civic art. So considering architects as citizens who are responsible and they are living in the city. So they have to kind of, they have in some way to embrace this responsibility. Architecture literacy, so really provide real knowledge, not just have people experiment without and try out things without having any reference, without having precedent. Teach how to build well, so engage with construction, with tectonics, with materials, with craftsmanship, and also how to think, so engage with thinking, because many times people do things which are kind of done maybe successfully, but people lack the arguments to explain why they do it. Russell Windham from Curtis and Windham, another really, really prominent firm in America, promoting classical tradition, native Texan. He was from the various offices and then started work with Philip Curtis in '92. And he's has been served as the chairman of the board of Institute of Classical Architecture, president of the Texas chapter, and so on. And they have published, the firm has published a monograph, The Vision of Place, which is a very handsome and beautiful book. And then really, what I really interested when he kind of talks about, you know, about his objectives, his kind of concerns, the next generation of leadership. So he says that his concerns, despite of the talent and the plenty of talent energy within the community, he misses a new level, or the next level of leaders in the organization. So he would like to know more about that, and I'm sure that there is, but you know, I think he kind of wants to know about it. And you know, Nia was mentioning the succession, who is kind of taking on, who's continuing this amazing work and who's developing it. So he was very much concerned about that. The second point, this invasion of star architecture also in the classical world. So it's not only modernism, but also classical seems to have a lot of interest in me culture rather than us culture. So the individualism being overrunning the sense of community. So that's second. And then also this the necessity of the traditional movement to reach out, to get more popular and to kind of get more known and to kind of create a larger type of popular gathering and motivating and enrolling enthusiasts. So what I think Nikos would call engagement. So engagement with a wider community, even people who are not necessarily on your side. And then some examples of the work, and again, you see the finish and the work, the detailing, and absolutely splendid quality. And now these are projects which probably all of you have seen, you're familiar with, but I really like this project, and I thought that was like, should have been yesterday in the neuroscience and craftsmanship, the fractals, and I see how this develops and this embraces beautifully the countryside, the materials, the local climate, the local vegetation, and the fractal quality. So everywhere in the eaves, in the walls, in the pavement, and how it kind of seamlessly merges with the landscape and the massing. It's kind of really just spectacular. It's really beautiful. It's really the rightest thing which has to be there. Dustin Shubow, he's the president of the National Civic Art Society, non-profit organization that promotes classical tradition, public art and architecture. In 2021, he was elected chairman of the US Commission of Fine Arts, an independent federal agency comprising 7 presidential appointees who are the aesthetic guardians of Washington, DC. And I think that's where James is also a member, and also Duncan Stroy, I think. Is that right? Yeah. So they were recently appointed, and I think that's a great team. He testified in Congress on topics as the future of the National Mall, and we have heard Leon Creer talk about the National Mall and the scale and everything, and the design of the Dwight Eisenhower Memorial, which made a lot of headlines, and there was a lot of polemics. And he's the author of the Gary Towers of Eisenhower, the National Civic Art Society report on the Eisenhower Memorial, a critical examination of the memorial competition. And that's the project by Gary and headlines, and that created quite a lot of agitation. And so National Civic Society, and reflecting this wide, Harris Poll, as a Civic Art Society, Harris Poll found that 72% of the Americans, including majority, all through every kind of category, prefer traditional architecture for US courthouses and federal offices. And Donald Trump, installed or issued an executive order, which was was very poorly received, I must say, by many of our colleagues, that he reoriented federal architecture to classicism again. And it was rescinded recently by the new American president. And to finish, and I hope I wasn't too much over time, so Nili, Portugali, so has been already introduced by Nia. So she's seventh generation descendant of a family living in the holy Kabbalah city of Sefat, Israel, since the early 19th century. Her multidisciplinary work, both in practice and theory, is closely connected to the holistic phenomenological school of thought. And so she was a senior lecturer at the Bezalel Academy of Art and Design, Jerusalem, and at the Faculty of Architecture and Town Planning at the Technion Haifa. She's a guest lecturer at MIT, Harvard, Carleton, Oxford University, and other very reputed universities. Her work is documented in books, in the Dictionnaire d'Architecture du XXe siècle, Hazan Publication France, journals, TV, and press. And just to finish, so she did, as Nia mentioned, research work with Christopher Alexander at the Center for Environmental Structure, and I think we should look more into that because he has been mentioned many times now in the last days, and I know that Nikos Salingaros is a follower, and also Michael Mehaffey. So we have many people who think that Christopher Alexander should be studied, should enter more in the world of classical theory and classical thinking. Her work was exhibited at Venice Architecture Biennale, Barcelona, Spain, Linz, and so on. Her feature hybrid film, which we will see now later, after the panel discussion, and the alley she whitewashed in light blue, of which she wrote its script, directed, edited, and digital production design, can be seen as a third of a trilogy following the building she designed as an architect and published work. So this is interesting. So building, thinking, making films, writing books. This is a synagogue project by Nili, and this is the most famous, very celebrated Felicia Blumenthal Music Center, which she mentions. And so this is the film we will see later. This is actually the poster of the film. And I think I was in some way indirectly asked by Nia to remind, just to give you a kind reminder of the panel rules. And I don't know if I respected my own rules, but I can read you the panel rules. So focus, so 3-minute comment limit. So don't take too much time. So let other people talk. Respect, so that don't cut it to other people, listen to them. And, when you speak, also allow other people from the panel to get some time to speak. And support, maybe engage. So because I saw in the format in the previous day, sometimes somebody saying something and somebody else say something and it has nothing to do. So it should also be sometimes a dialogue, and people should kind of engage with what has been said, what the moderator encourages you to say. So just be a little bit more, how would I say, supportive and interactive, and consensus. So when there's a change of kind of topic, that's when it has to be consensual. So it's not that we can kind of go from one thing to another without, there should be some type of coherence. Thank you so much. And please, James, it's up, it's your job now.
Thank you. Lucien, Mr. Steil, thank you very much. If you can do us the favor of not sharing your screen, then we can get larger. Yeah, there we go. Thank you so much. And
yeah,
thank
okay,
you.
so
Thank you. I'm going to do the wonderful work of thanking you on behalf of all of the panelists at the same time for that wonderful in-depth introduction of each of us. And we're all very, very grateful. And that way I could sort of speak for all of us so that each of us can then focus our 3 minutes on responding to Robert Adams' comments. I've been taking notes. I hope that the panelists have also been taking notes so that they can address some of the larger themes brought forward and arguments brought forward by Bob Adam. With that, I will start with Nili Portugali. If you could please speak up and tell us what you say. And I'm also keeping time. Okay, well, hopefully she'll patch in. Let's see, Brandon Rowe, might you say a few words, please, about your responses to Robert Adam?
Yes, Robert Adams' talk was quite fascinating. Our new program, architecture program here at Utah Valley University, it's interesting in the sense that it is situated in a public university. And so we have to deal with some of these situations where we have dealing with primarily the public's health and safety and well-being. And so with this, we have kind of this argument of populism versus globalism. And our approach in our program is really to understand the other side of the equation. And so in some ways, you could say we are taking on more of the populist approach because we are trying to appeal to ordinary people whose preferences are usually disregarded. And so with that, I think Robert Adams' presentation was quite provocative, and the arguments that he articulated. But one of the things that I would argue that we should be aware of as a traditional and classical movement is that there's also this focus of this new body of evidence that's emerging that we saw in yesterday's presentation, and how we might use some of these findings and research and in modern science to really help us promote an environment that does promote bodily healing, that does boost cognition, that does increase our emotional well-being, inspiring our human spirit, etc. So those are some initial thoughts.
Thank you very much, Brandon. Mark Wilson Jones, it's a great pleasure to be on a panel with you, sir, and be happy to have your comments.
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm very glad you did the communal thanks to Lucian, so that's out the way, and to Bob as well. And I wanted to pick up really, and I suppose confirm some of what Bob has been saying, and it's something that we've been talking about quite often, particularly in relation to the British tag, the traditional architecture group, as opposed to gathering. And of course, Bob's been important in setting it up years ago. And I've recently had the honor of becoming the new chair. So we've had lots of discussions about, many of the issues that, first of all, was in Bob's talk, and then also the general thing of what Nia and everyone is trying to discuss today. So I suppose I just wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, I certainly agree on this convergence we're seeing. I mean, I think there was historically a lot of fragmentation going on in the 90s and the noughties. And there is some sense of convergence, and we do need to seize the moment and make use of it. And but I think there's also many different aspects of this convergence, and some of it is also just not driven by, let's say, values and sentiment, let alone spirituality, but is actually coming from a certain sameness in building, which is driven by development, construction issues, and regulations and so on, and energy use. So we're getting a lot of conformity coming in. But I think the kind of challenge for our movement is to sort of harness that, this convergence, and actually make our case for championing the aspects of it that are really meaningful to people in general, which of course is the placemaking aspect, the well-being thing we've just heard about. In fact, people stay better in these places. And I think fundamentally really important, given certain legislation in UK and Britain, UK and Europe, is the whole energy aspect, sustainability. And I think the traditionalists can really make their case that, look, we are inherently doing sustainable practices. We are people building with local materials, local skills. We are building for the long term and all this. I think we need to get the message out there. because that's not so much an ideological thing. We may be hopefully getting away from dogma, but this is something I think everyone can agree on, including the students of the younger generation. So that's, I think, a very important message, and we're trying to push that. So that's really, sorry, that's all I wanted to say on that one. Whoops, wish that would go away. I just didn't want to talk for more than 3 minutes.
It sounds like your time's up.
Yeah, that was my time's up. So I think that's an important. No, usually I do that little trick with the phone volume down so no one can hear it. But this time the little dog jumped up and it kind of, you know, I got in a flap. So there we are. But that's the main message, I think.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you also for what you do. And I neglected to thank Brandon Rowe for all of his leadership at this new educational effort in Utah, in the American Northwest. Very important to all of us in education to know that it's burgeoning other places too. Mark Wilson-Jones, thank you very much. Justin Shubow, can you offer your thoughts, please?
Well, thank you for having me, and I greatly enjoyed Robert's presentation. You know, one thing I would add to what he said regarding, you know, I don't know if populism is the right word, but an assertion of national identity. You know, of course, there is the executive order that Trump issued that was briefly mentioned by Lucian. But a few years before that, Xi of China gave a speech where he said, "No more weird architecture." And he was critiquing the architecture that was being constructed in his country and essentially calling for designs that are more representative of, you know, not native Chinese culture. And so that would be another example of, you know, an assertion of national identity in design. You know, the executive order that Trump issued was very controversial, but I think really only controversial among certain elites. You know, the National Civic Art Society did a survey of 2,000 random American adults that found that 72% favored classical and traditional design for federal courthouses and buildings, and that there were these widespread majorities across all demographic groups, including political party affiliation. Now, that's not to say that the New York Times didn't publish an editorial contra the executive order titled, "What's So Great About Fake Roman Temples?" And in that editorial, the New York Times, which is the arbiter of elite liberal opinion, straight out said that classical architecture is not appropriate for federal public buildings. You know, that it might have been appropriate 250 years ago, but the founding fathers, you know, they were borrowing from Europe, and now it's our turn to create, you know, our own independent architectural identity. In other words, the New York Times is saying that classical architecture, even for a federal courthouse, a new federal courthouse, is somehow not native. It's not appropriate. And I don't think what the New York Times is saying represents what ordinary people think. And ordinary people are happy to see, for instance, courthouses that look like courthouses, as opposed to some kind of construction project or something that's avant-garde. Something that was lost in the debate of the executive order was actually looking at what the federal government has been building. And there have been crazy buildings, including by people like Tom Main. I encourage you to look at the San Francisco Federal Building, or the Salt Lake City Federal Courthouse, which the cover of a local newspaper there said looked like a board cube and is widely unpopular. Those are the kinds of buildings that the federal government have been foisting upon us, and it's the architects who have been driving design. There is a principle that the government follows, which is that design shall follow from the architectural profession to the government and not the other way around. And that's exactly how the American Institute of Architects want it. They want to be driving architecture in a modernist direction, and the idea that the federal government could switch directions was completely anathema to them. And Trump is obviously an extremely controversial figure, but he was not afraid to go against the entire American Institute of Architects, which launched a petition signed by tens of thousands of architects.
Thank you very much, Justin. Very well made points, and I think points that not a lot of people are very much aware of. Thank you for that. Maybe this is a good opportunity now to have Nicholas Boyce Smith talk a little bit about how you did talk about in your wonderful address. It was frustratingly fast, but it was fun to see it delivered at such a quick pace. It demonstrated your command of all
excuse me, James.
Yeah.
Excuse me, James, but I think that Nicholas is with his family and not with us right now.
Okay. Well, I was hoping that he could follow Justin. That would have been very interesting. Nir, thank you. While I've got you, Nir, can you respond to Bob Adam, please?
Well, I think that Bob, I really respect what Bob's done, mostly because of the results, as much as anything else. He has really been I think he's the English Henry Hope Reed in many ways, at least within the institutions, making a difference that would anchor traditional work there without having completely obliterated. I really wonder about where we're going. I really wonder whether we're not looking at things from, according to patterns we were used to before. I really think that when you actually look at the new science that's coming out, when you look at the content, like what Justin just said, the content of the executive order was good and correct. Obviously, the politics didn't work, but we are looking at a direction where we're very conscious of what is the better thing to do for the better good for the greater good, for the greater number. And I think that the way we communicated it is exceedingly important. And all I have is a series of questions. How do we do it? What's the right way? At the end of the day, I think that every classicist should have a modernist as a best friend. That's what I tell the political people, that everybody should have a friend from the other side, from the opposite end of the political spectrum. And we all come together and work things out in a way that's actually good for the greater good. So that's kind of where I'm at on that one. And I think that Robert has been together with, I would, at this point, between Robert and Nicholas, I think they are, as far as I know, and then Mark and the people at the Prince's Foundation and the people at Intibau, inspired by them, I think that they're doing really great work, and you and the other people who are teaching here in the U.S. and Justin at the NCAS is obviously a major leader. And the ICA doing such really great work. So here we are. Let's move forward. And I think what's really important for us, look at the faces. We're all of an age. There is a smaller number that is youthful, at least what I see here now. I think every single one of us individually, personally, should start looking at succession if we haven't yet. By the end of next year, we should all have a successor in place. Thank you.
Nir, thank you very, very much. And yeah, I like that. The idea of a successor, identifying one, is an integral part of tradition. I'm looking. Zeynep, Iqbal, are you available to respond?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. Yeah.
Thanks for the invitation. Firstly, it's a pleasure to be here. I am relatively young when I look at the panelist group. So the kind of experience I have in my work, most probably is very different from yours. Maybe I will speak from that kind of perspective. Robert, your presentation, it was very interesting to me. Firstly, talking about globalization and also, especially in the architecture field, I took a few notes. Hopefully, I won't miss any of them. One of the things that really spoke to me was you talking about appropriating the Atlantic uniform in architecture. It's something I definitely always come across when it comes to Turkey, where I'm from. And I'm sure in many countries it's kind of very much of a similar experience. And you talked about Bilbao effect. It just took me back to my bachelor studies in Vienna. I was just trying to remember if the word tradition was even mentioned in my architecture studies. Not at all. We never spoke about traditional architecture. So that's quite interesting when I think of it. Perhaps that's why I remembered Bilbao and all this Guggenheim Museum. That was really like big examples when it comes to our studies. Yeah, and then Nicola's presentation about that project, I forgot the name, I'm sorry, but I remember the visuals, and I remember that you talked about Nicola's design with neighbors, involving them, engaging with them, organizing workshops, local survey, etc. That's quite interesting, quite nice, because when we think about the word tradition, it's something that comes down over years, and that's something that's a practice that actually should be serving the communities. That's definitely there, but my question is affordability of the houses that we produce, because if the community can't afford this, how can we talk about the word tradition? Yeah, that's it for now from me.
Very grateful, and congratulations on your success. And I must say, it's really, truly beautiful work. Entirely appropriate you were given your award. Well earned.
Thank you.
Mark Ferguson, my boss and dean, and I just must say it's a pleasure to be able to say those things, and a very, very good friend, the dean of the School of Architecture at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Is Mark present?
I'm present.
Okay, very good.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Very good. Thank you, Bob, for a superb talk. Very illuminating, as always. Helpful for me is your preoccupation with those forces bigger than architecture that shape architecture, shape cities, shape individual buildings. I often think that our role is to decorate for forces that we don't control: political, economic, social, but that we do have a responsibility to create backdrop, and to do that in a responsible way, hence architecture as a civic art. We're making individual buildings as architects, and we're training young people at the Catholic University of America to be designers of individual buildings, but at the same time, making them aware that buildings fit together, they make ensembles, they create streets, neighborhoods, towns, and cities. And I thank Nicholas for his superb work. It's quite an achievement to see all of that beautiful work in such a short time. And in fact, coming from banking, I suspect gave you the perspective that an architect does not have. We're so focused on the artistic aspect of making. And as a banker, you are more sensitive to those bigger forces that Bob described for us that shape our environments, and wrangling those forces into a force for good. And when I say good, making places that serve our well-being, that are sustainable, and these are indeed things which are inherent in traditional and classical architecture. Thank you, Mark, for underscoring that. Justin, thank you for introducing the word appropriateness. I think this is like the word tradition, Zeynep. It's a word that's not used in architecture schools, but for me, it's been a sort of guiding principle, although subject to interpretation, and you apply it in different ways in different circumstances. But appropriateness implies that you have a respect and understanding of the place and the culture that you've been invited to build something, that you're sensitive to the needs and expectations of your patron or client, that you're also a successful negotiator between that patron and the community that they've chosen to build in, and that when you do your work, you've actually created value not only for your client who's paying you, but you've also created value for the community. And that is a perspective that we promote here at the school. Community stewardship is our mission. It's on our website. This is the thing that we are training young architects to become when they practice. And indeed, we are training architects to practice, but to do it with a broad perspective.
Sorry about that. Perfect.
No, that's perfect.
It was perfect. Thank you so much. And I think this leaves, unless Nili Portugali is present now. Are you, Nili? Stefano Serafini, please, signore.
Buonasera. Nice to be here. Now, my observation is just about this beautiful lecture about the concept of what people like. That's a very interesting observation. That's something that comes back during also what other people is talking about. I think this definition is not to be taken as for granted as something absolute. I'm thinking of the experience of Bologna in the 50s. In Bologna, we had this movement of people coming from the countryside and moving into the cities, and were peasants practically, and most of them refused the project of social housing having a garden in the center. They prefer a kind of tower-like social housing because they say, oh, we are not peasants anymore, we want to be citizens. And they, after 50 years, they were lamenting, I mean, the children of these people were lamenting that their house is inhabitable and inhuman. So when we talk about what people like, we have always to keep in mind this reference to something very basic. The normal meaning of this means is about living in a decent way, having your let's say, needs that are social and that are at the same time biological to be met by architecture. And for sure, classical architecture do that. But then we have to also give something else to people that is a kind of project. So my question, if you want, is what traditional architecture, what kind of anthropology traditional architecture is bringing with these projects? Because I see this beautiful design, and this beautiful design speaks to me of a certain idea of a human being. That's something that must be considered. When the lecture by Professor Adam was referring to globalization, that's, I think, is a key element that should be taken in consideration. Now we are seeing what is happening in Europe with this war among Russia and Ukraine. And many people are talking about the coming back of the imperialism of Russia, so a new Soviet era period. I think this discourse is true in a certain sense, but in another sense, it's like forgetting that we are facing another kind of empire. Negri and Hart spoke about the empire as a new form of power that goes beyond the idea of national states. And for example, this is exemplified by the power of the United States and China. So I wonder if our architecture, our ideas that we have to root our architecture in the real needs of human beings as, let's say, rational animals in the classical sense, should also start thinking of a new political project. New political project, I mean something that speaks to the need nowadays of people. For example, the independency of a city in comparison with these huge powers that are around us and inside our house with this kind of apparatuses. So we live in a situation where we are totally surrounded by new forms of power, like the power of big corporations that can scan and control our life through the means that we have. So what about privacy? What about the relations that we have with the internet world? We are now connecting to each other, and we are talking about space, but of course we are living now in a different kind of space. It's a kind of a mix between the infosphere and our beautiful world. I see, for example, beautiful rooms, and I look at them and say, look at these architects. I mean, so, but these places are connected to a screen. Okay, that's it.
Thank you very much, Stefano. Russell Windham, from the aforementioned Lone Star State, please.
Soon to be Lone Star Country, maybe, I don't know.
Lone Star Republic.
Exactly. Thank you for having me. And it's an honor to be associated with so many great thinkers. I'm a practicing architect, and I think I was invited here to talk just a little bit about the ICAA and what they're doing moving forward and what we're seeing. First, I'd like to thank Bob. As I say, I'm architect in the trenches running a business. And so to hear him talk about what he's seeing going on globally and culturally is exciting to me. I don't have that perspective. And I will say, one of the exciting parts of that is what we're seeing at the ICAA supports what he just said. What the position we've taken, we're all about education. Our mission statement is about engaging and educating professionals, educators, students, and enthusiasts. What we learned really on, these enthusiasts, they're the ones that can allow all the rest of us to build beautiful places. And so we want to work on the potential clients as well as the potential architects. And so it really is sort of a wide swath that we're trying to work with. We have seen through the pandemic that we've been able to get our message out to more people through the internet than we ever imagined. We were an organization that really struggled with, can you teach traditional architecture and that sense of place over the internet? And what we have found is the enthusiasm for the message has just been incredible. And so it's been great that we've been in a position to sort of embrace that and do everything we can with it. I heard someone else talk about succession, and I really am worried about that. From my personal point of view, as being chair of the ICAA, I'm 59 years old. I'm into my 7th year. And so there's a good chance they'll just run me off because they're tired of me. But seeing this next level, what we're seeing is young people and young architects really excited about traditional architecture. But to be able to have the time and afford the time to take off and lead these different organizations, the generation just behind me, we're not seeing it yet, is my perspective. And so certainly concerns me. The other thing I would just briefly say, our approach to spreading the word through universities has not been to fight with the faculties. Instead, lots of universities are lacking money. And so if we can come in and give a short course over a weekend, if we can just get the word and the idea to the students, then they are taking it and moving it beyond. So what we have been doing in the ranks is trying to develop younger architects who can take a day or a weekend off from their jobs and go be educators within these different opportunities. So I think our approach, I would call, is much more grassroots. And what we are finding, much to what Bob is saying, if we can get these kids to have experience and to start looking at the world around them and understanding the difference between good, sustainable, they are smart kids and they're finding their way. So there you go. That's where I am.
Russell, thank you very, very much. And Nir, I think maybe I'll just offer just a few and then we can close the panel, unless you wanted more discussion. I'm a practicing architect like Russell, and I'm also very much in the academy at the Catholic University of America. And there's a great American expression in politics, and I'm actually very grateful for Bob to bring in the discussion of politics. And of course, Nicholas Boyd Smith's entire effort is firmly rooted in politics. And I think it's necessary to understand, for all architects to understand, all planners to understand, that we're engaged in an inherently political, small p, effort. because our work is necessarily public. One cannot not see the building that they are passing or approaching. So it's a necessarily civic and public art, and that necessarily affects and impacts the polis, which clearly indicates the political nature of architecture. In the United States, there's this almost a cliche, but it's not a cliche in the sense that it's still a very useful phrase or statement, and that is that all politics is local. And I would say this too, that the same could be said exactly without any modification about architecture. All architecture is local necessarily. The minute it's built, the built work is by definition localized and not portable, notwithstanding Bob's wonderful sort of mishmash of, collecting buildings to the southern tip of Manhattan. That's nice work. And so with that in mind, so too is education local, because it's localized to the place and it's personalized to the student. And this is what I very much like about what Russell was just talking about and Mark is talking about. That when you're educating, you're reaching out to a particular individual in a particular place. And that by doing so, you're making that architecture personal and you're making it local. I've never really understood, I understand global economics, and I understand global politics, and I understand that those things are global. But it's not necessarily the case that because economics and politics can be made global, that architecture is necessarily then also made global. Bob, thank you so much. And Nicholas Boyd-Smith, in your absence, thank you for your wonderful, wonderful presentations. And all of your great efforts for architecture.
Any chance I can respond to some of the panel comments?
Absolutely.
Please.
Okay, I because they're all good, and I really would like to respond if that's possible. I've taken notes, but I'll try and be very brief because everyone else has been excellently brief. I'm looking at my notes. And Brandon, the evidence for research, neurology and biology, absolutely. I mean, the thing about research is if it's good research, it's good research, and if it's the real thing, it's not something you really argue with. So it's always valuable. It tends to have a fairly neutral outcome. Mark, thanks a lot. I want to follow up your point about sameness in buildings. Something I often say to, particularly, let's say I'm designing a row house. Basically, it's got a 20-foot front, and it's about 15 feet high, and the plan's pretty much the same whatever you do. And as architects, we get incredibly excited about that bit on the front. Actually, architects have much more in common than their differences. I mean, you just must remember that. We all have clients who don't pay. We all have planning authorities we hate. We all have contractors who don't do it properly. Actually, we must always remember that we have much more in common. We make a huge amount of our differences. And Mark, again, sustainability. In the early days of sustainability, everyone thought it was a technical thing, and all the technocrats jumped on it and said, hey guys, and all the traditional architects said, oh, well, technical stuff's not really for us. And suddenly we discovered that we were on the side of the gods. That actually producing buildings that lasted a very long time out of local materials was intrinsically sustainable. And that remains so. In fact, there's a conference coming up for Iqbal exactly on that subject. Justin, I just wanted to follow up on some really interesting points you made. And I know we're not supposed to take political sides in this. And I know that in the States you had this problem with something being put forward by Trump and people objecting to that and so on and so on. And I just remind you that actually regionalism, as something to do with what we'd loosely call peasant culture, was extremely important in communist states and still remains so. If you actually look at the assembly of the people in China, you'll see that everyone comes in their regional costumes. I mean, this is actually interestingly, because this is also a communist idea. So be careful about calling classicism right wing. I mean, I don't know what you think of Stalin, but you might think that Stalin was right wing or left wing, but Stalin promoted classical architecture. as indeed did the other side. So, you know, don't let's get too worked up about the political aspects of that. And that's a problem with associating with populism. Populism is a phenomenon which has some unfortunate political circumstances sometimes. Nia, as your point about friends from the other side, I couldn't agree more. I have many friends from the other side. I was honorary secretary of the RIBA. I've managed to get every single president of the RIBA for the last 6 presidents to agree to support traditional architecture. I did that by, you know, trying to be a nice guy, really. I mean, nothing really more complicated than that. Getting to know it, because actually it's much more difficult to object to a person if you know them than it is to object to a principle. And don't forget that. That's extremely important. Zeynep, actually, on the issue of tradition, I would invite you to read my book, Time for Architecture. I'd like you all to read it because I need to sell lots of them. But I do go very closely into tradition, but also the issue of affordability. I mean, I deal significantly in what in Britain is called speculative housing, which is market housing, and it has to be affordable. And actually, there's nothing unaffordable about traditional design. On the contrary, actually, good, simple buildings with an understanding of proportion and materials are not expensive. And Mark, I just wanted to follow up on about Nicholas Boyd Smith. I really would like, I mean, he's not here now, so I can say it without him blushing. It's just how important what is happening in the UK is at this particular moment. It is the idea that planning, which is a kind of dreadful machine in Britain, is actually going to be guided by codes, which are going to be based on what is popular. I mean, I can't tell you the significance of this. I can't tell you the difficulties that we're having in the office for place in dealing with it. You know, because believe me, the sort of backlash on this is not overt, but it's very, very subtle. So that is actually happening at a national political level. But dealing with national and local, as several brought up, I mean, you know, in the end, well, I don't want to bring up the problem with having incredible, awful things happening in Ukraine at the moment, but this is generally acknowledged in political circles that Putin is just taking a step backwards. He's actually taking a political step backwards, and this will, as a result of this, one of the things that is the reason that it will fail. So I'm just going through my notes now because I think, and Russell, education is the key to succession. And actually, I've also discovered that actually giving architecture students 2 days of education like this is very good because actually their professors are glad to have the day off. And secondly, you're actually giving somebody hard knowledge. You're giving somebody hard, usable, transferable knowledge. It's surprising how little they get of that. And actually, my experience is that most students really appreciate it. I just like to finish off with Stefano, because I actually think Stefano raised some really, really interesting and important issues. You know, the problem of what is popular and to what extent you should guide what is popular, the extent to which is a free market. I know in Poland they had a problem with older buildings, because older buildings were where in the communist period they'd been forced to live and be poor. So actually living in an older building meant you were poor. And actually there's a big wide issue in this. We have it easy in Britain because, you know, we have a very open market and relatively fluid situation. So how you discover what is popular is a very interesting and complex issue. But I also think, and I'd like to finish on this one, is that you bring up what is again a really important point. Is okay, I've tried to produce a sort of broad political view. The political view and the social view is always changing, and how much you know, if the infosphere and the virtual world, which is significantly occupied by people, just how much that is going to affect in the future, I actually don't know. I'd like to know, but it is definitely something we need to contemplate, because this is a significant thing that's happening at the moment. Maybe it won't. In the end, people have to live in physical places. Much as I would like to live inside my computer sometime, I actually can't. But nonetheless, I think you brought up, if the view I take is that social, political, and economic events are significant and will find their outlet in architecture, there is no question that the virtual world is a major social, political, and economic event. It will therefore have its impact on architecture. And what that is, I actually don't know. But I want to finish on that now. I'd like to thank you very much, Stefano, for that. I thought that was a really, really important point.
Stefano, can I ask you to respond to Bob? I think he was kind of correct in identifying yours as a critical discussion here.
Thank you very much, Professor Adam. I'm actually, I'm currently studying some literature about the subject, especially, I mean, it's pretty famous, the work by Shoshana Zuboff on capitalism of control. That's an interesting book. It's 650 pages, very worth reading. And there are several other studies about the subject. And I wonder how architecture and urbanism can face this new phase of control we are facing. Because in a way, having home, and also the authors speak about that, speak about the value of a home, of a house, as a kind of place that is sacred, that leave a space for humankind to be protected, to feel home, to feel individual, etc. I think that classical architecture can give a lot of answer to that, but not only because it goes back to a kind of, immobile vision of humankind. This is rather something different. For example, when Polybius came to Rome, he found a new political system, something totally new. Aristotle didn't think about that. He found a place where the citizens were coming together, becoming citizens because they have a common project. So they were not put in common because they have the same blood, the same color of the skin, the same religion, but just because they have the same project. And this project was the city. That kind of language has been beautifully exemplified by Roman architecture with its practicality, etc. So nowadays, what is the new Rome? What is the new kind of classical architecture we have to do? Because ancient Roman didn't know they were classic, you know what I mean with that. So it just is not something aesthetic only, it's something that goes much beyond that. It's something that can speak to the world and give a new perspective. Because in the end, we are assisting to risk of nuclear war. We have war continuously. It's not only the Russian making wars around the world, isn't it? But we have also a huge amount of suicide, a huge amount of depression in the world. We have a huge pollution. So we have so many things that modernity failed to achieve and creating disasters. So it's time maybe to rethink, and I think architecture is a big, powerful tool for doing that. I say that as a non-architect. I'm an user of architecture, and I love to have an architecture make me feel home and make me feel free. And we are losing this feeling of home and this feeling of freedom everywhere. So I think your movement can give some answer by reflecting on this subject. That's it. So thank you very much for what you're doing.
Thank you. And in a really wonderful way, I think that's a great place to stop. I wouldn't want to invite a lesser comment. That's very, very well put. And I think it sums the challenge of what this discussion in this STOA has been putting forth. Thank you very much, Professor Russo.
You know, I liked the film was really, really well done. I liked also the comments and the voices was very, very nurturing, was really, really nice. So, and I never heard people speaking, I never heard Hebraic language, and it's so beautiful. I mean, I say it's very warm, it's very nice.
Yeah, I'm very happy. I appreciate what you say, really.
Very beautiful, yeah. Congratulations, it's very nice, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, in the last 2 years, I couldn't screen it, on site. Before, I was in many places all over the world, in India, in the United States, but now in the last 2 years, but good that we have this technology, And it's better than nothing, of course, but when you screen it, you know, on a big screen, it's much, you know, more impressive. But anyway.
And the little girl is so amazing. She's really a good actress. She's so good. Yeah.
She's amazing. She's really
she's
amazing.
Really amazing. And she has a.
She's not a family member of yours?
No. I just picked her. No. But she was so intelligent that, you know, she, you know, you didn't have to tell her a lot, and she understood everything. And
yeah, she's very charismatic. Yeah.
She was very nice. Yeah. But, you know, anyway, so you think, I mean, up to you, Neil, and
if I may say,
I mean, whatever you think, if you want to start, we can start. I mean, you know.
I just want to say that it's a beautiful film, beautiful sceneries, beautiful photography, and also the music mixed together, almost sublime. I was just very impressed by how walkable that place was. No cars whatsoever. I mean, where I'm from, Mexico, that just seems unreal. Just another planet. Yeah. And also how safe it appeared for the little girl to walk on the town. But thank you very much, Nili.
Flavio, I'm happy you mentioned the music. I love the music. So is this like music you would hear in the synagogue? Because it sounded very much like the Christian sacred music.
Yeah. Well, everybody asked me, why do I put this church music, Christian? No, but I tell you now, the composer is Salomone Rossi. He is a Jewish composer from 17th century from Venice.
Oh, great. Yeah, I mean,
okay, now, of course, at that time, you know, the Jewish, I mean, the music was very much influenced by the church, of course. But he was Jewish, and so of course, I chose this music, but you know, I mean, I think the whole theme of the film is point out that, you know, there is sort of universal thing which is beyond religion, beyond culture, beyond whatever. So the fact that you have this association of, you know, Christian music, that's fine with me, because I think somehow it, you know, put forward also, you know, the idea about things that are more universal, but
yeah, but I think when you, I mean, I'm just saying like that because I really like sacred music of any kind. And I'm saying this very superficially because in reality, I think that sacred music is universal, because I can listen to, and actually I really like that you Buddhist references, and you kind of reaching out in different cultures and then just kind of bracing it in again. I think that was so well done. And in some way, you know, the feeling, you know, the empathy and emotion is kind of really transcending any type of culture or religion, I think. So, because I know that, you know, it was is a Jewish setting, is Israel and so on, but I think I felt so much at home in what you showed, you know, and I've never been there, but it was, for me, it was like a place, you know, it was almost like that's why I said I want to meet your grandmother. It was almost like my grandmother, you know, and it was almost like, you know, okay, you know, I know these smells and sounds and, you know, the sounds on the pavement where people walking and everything. So it's like Italy, it's like Luxembourg. You know, when Leon Krier shows his Luxembourg pictures of the 60s or 70s, it's kind of about like that, you know. So this is so amazing. And the music, the music is so wonderful. And I think what's also wonderful that you know, the place you're coming from, there were people who were sent away or expelled from Spain. And then you see people living in Italy, in Spain, and kind of working within a completely new culture setting, and kind of also this kind of dialectics between their own identity, as Jewish identity, and the kind of place, that was so productive. That was so wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I think you got the essence of the thing, but I was talking about it because I think that, I mean, behind, you as I showed also, in the film, if you take, the alley in Sfat, or the alley in Venice, or the alley in a Greek island, it has a very similar feeling. And it's not by coincidence. I mean, this was one of the points, in the film, that there is behind some kind of superstructure or patterns or whatever you want to call it, which is common and reflects some common things which are already printed in our mind. And this is why you have a very similar feeling. And so what you're saying, it reminds you this and this, it's not a coincidence. I mean, it is like this. And, when I was screening the film in India, or all over even, but in India, I remember, in Mumbai. So one told me, it reminds me the village that my grandmother was near Mumbai, and this and that. And I was very happy that, that it actually conveyed, the experience was like this, because this is also the, one of the, I would say, the insights that I wanted to put forward, but obviously it's like this. I mean, there is no difference, I mean, when we go to a church or a synagogue, or, a Buddhist monastery or whatever, we have a very similar feeling. And well, I explain what I think is behind this similarity, which can be very different in form, of course, but a very similar feeling. So yeah, so I agree.
It's interesting how you bring the feeling thing, because technically speaking, it's some measure on the beauty scale is what you're talking about. You have an overall good feeling, and it is on some kind of a scale from sort of good to really good to very good. And likely, when you're talking about the alley in Sfat, the alley in Venice, the alley in Kyoto, it could be that their similarity lies inherently in a certain, I'm going to call this in a vibration, in a certain vibratory sense, which you can actually measure in the human brain, and it would be the same. And that correlates to the beauty scale. They're all about 6 on the beauty scale. So probably in Venice, it would be a little higher because everything in Venice is prettier. But I'm wondering if there are questions. Are there questions to Nili from the audience? And we have your question from Alex Sabo. I wonder if growing up in a beautiful place makes it easier to remember more experiences from childhood.
Sorry, can you repeat it? Yeah.
I wonder if growing up in a beautiful place makes it easier to remember more experiences from childhood.
Well, I don't know, because, I grew up. Actually, I was not born there, because I was the first generation who was not born there, but I spent half of my time of the year there. So I don't know if I can answer this question, because this is the place that I was, born. But So I don't know if I can
Bertram,
answer.
do you want to say your question and your thoughts?
Thank you, Nir. Yeah, it's an interesting question. From my story, I remember growing up in a really ugly commie block area in East Germany in the early 1990s. And yeah, it was a time of despair and people being unemployed. And yeah, it really didn't feel welcoming to me, even when I was just 3 years old. But then my parents made a very clever move to take me to the city of Prague. And I got to experience the beauty of a real old town. And that really was the initial moment I was fascinated and got in love with classical architecture and beauty. And ever since then, I'm captivated and fascinated until this day. So yeah, might be the travel bias though. When you travel to other places, you get more experiences and see new places. But yeah,
to a certain point, maybe. But at the end of the day, your brain is going to process wherever you are pretty much the same way. It's a really good point.
I mean, from just one other addition to that, many East Germans I talked to, they actually really appreciated growing up in commie blocks. They said they had a really beautiful childhood or whatever. So I think it really depends what frame do you have and what your surrounding family is like and people are like. Yeah. It's not just the buildings, but definitely they are a factor, I think.
All of us here are very, very attuned to the built environment. And I don't think that everybody is. And I think that attunement is also on a spectrum. Very few people go to architecture school or deal with this kind of stuff. I mean, out of the population, the whole entire world population of architects and engineers, I believe, is around 1 million, maybe 2 million people altogether on the whole planet out of 7 billion. So it's not that popular an occupation, and probably because of the sensibilities, you know?
Yeah, so everybody, so Nili, I'm born in Brazil in an industrial city, and I don't remember anything about it, but because I lived there 5 years. But when I see the pictures, it looks very much to this, like the city I moved in Luxembourg, which is also an industrial city. So you have a lot of smoke and a lot of chimneys and a lot of industries. But for me, it became it became like some type of a fantasy, you know. And I never really thought it was an ugly place, until people told me that it was an ugly place. For me, it was the most beautiful place. I had my grandmother, my grandfather. And everything was tied together. We still had neighborhoods, and it was stands, and there was worker neighborhood, and people were biking. So for me, the aesthetics were not really that important. It was more like, you know, today in the meetings, some people were saying about the culture of life rather than the aesthetics. So just being together, living together, and having some type of, how would I say, urbanity, whatever the aesthetics are, kind of help to shape a really strong memory. So I still have really strong memory. I'm living in the same place now, and I don't find it very beautiful. I don't find it attractive, but I haven't been there. I haven't been in the same place for 20 years. And meanwhile, there have been a lot of destruction, like also Leon Krier mentioned the other day. So in the last 20 years, there's so much going on, which is kind of destroying a little bit the whole. It's not only the physical environment, it's also the whole societal environments, the whole institutional kind of structures are kind of falling apart. So that's what makes it really less attractive. So.
But you know, if you will go now to Safed, you would think that that the film was made in Provence or Toscana, because Safed is also not like this. It's really a reconstruction. What I did is, well, first of all, every year it becomes worse and worse because unfortunately, the people who run the city, and they are not really conscious about, protecting, what they have in their hands. Because I really think that Safed was very special. I mean, really, it was one of the 4 holy cities of Israel. And I think that, and the Kabbalah was written there. And, I mean, and I think it really influenced also, the spirit and the architecture and the colors and everything. And unfortunately, they don't appreciate what they have in their hands. So when you go now, I really, when I shot the film, I did it in not in one time, in one, and then after 2 years, and then, but so at that time it was still okay, and but I, it's really, I mean, I had to do like, what you call production design. I stayed there for 2 weeks, and I sort of did what I had to do, even cleaning the alleys and whatever, and pushing, and really try to bring it to the state that it's like the memories that I had of the place, the feeling of the place when I was a child, or not even until the early 80s it was like this, but since then really. So yeah, but what you said about your place, Lucian, maybe it had some, feeling, this place, the place you're talking about. I mean, of course, it's to do with the people also, but this was not the point of the film. So, I was talking about the other things, but I'm not sure if your place, didn't have any, feeling of a place or feeling of a home can be created not only by small alleys and, what my experience was, but it can be, an industrial city also, but it depends, of course, but maybe it had some kind of aesthetics. I mean, if you look even, well, there are many, Angelopolis, I don't know if you know his films, the Greek one, or, there are many, what's his name? I forgot now, that he's really engaged very much with architecture, but not as a stage setting, but really as characters. I mean, also in my film, it was not locations like in a film, but it was a character. The architecture was one of the characters of the film. But there are few directors, there was an Italian one, and his film, I can't remember now, but it all happened in a city which was not this scale at all. So maybe your city where you grew up, I don't know, had something which, but I don't know.
I grew up, but I left, and I kind of, yeah. Anyway, so don't worry. I saw. So when I start seeing Italian places, and like many people, once you go to Italy or some of the great other European, I mean the cities I know, European cities, it's kind of difficult to go back to my hometown. Now, after being in Venice, it's kind of difficult to go back to my industrial hometown.
Where are you now? In which place?
In a place which is called Esch-sur-Alzette in Luxembourg, which is Esch-sur-Alzette, which is the cultural capital of Europe at this time. It's starting today. The celebrations are starting today, so I'm not even going there.
Finally, you'll be a cultured man.
I have no idea why they decided to have the cultural capital in my hometown. So I'm not there. I'm boycotting my hometown,
Somebody mentioned Dubrovnik, which really is the same. I mean, if you're talking about the same kind of fabric, this Mediterranean limestone
Oh my God.
fabric is, it's a thing. It's a type. It's definitely, if we were to build, a 100-year plan for a place like this, we would work directly with this aesthetic. And you see that it has all of the aspects of what you found in Tzfat, but also in Jerusalem you have this, and in all the old cities, wherever they are.
It is in
part of the
Malta.
world.
You go to Malta, it's all in stone. Malta, it's fantastic.
Oh, look at this. The last arch is squished. They started over here and oops, ran out of space. But you look at this and you know that all this is Venetian style. The impact of Venice on all of the Near East and the Eastern Mediterranean and the Southern Mediterranean was huge. These guys were the Amazon of the Crusades. So they did all the shipping and all the everything.
But you know what you said?
A fantastic impact.
I think it's the influence of the Middle East and Eastern cultures on the Western place, because
Yes.
Venice took so much from, Venice made such a wonderful blend of it.
Yeah, I have a friend, he was here yesterday or the day before, Alessandro Camis from Istanbul. And he says, nah, Venice, don't look at Venice, it's all Byzantine. That actually, he claims that Venice was was built on the model of Byzantium. I have no idea, but I'm Constantinople, I'm just telling you. And here we have.
Hello, Nir. Yes,
Yes.
he's right. He's right. All of Venetian architecture has a direct link to Byzantine architecture. 1400 years of Byzantine architecture.
Yeah. I mean, the Byzantines, they were quite really impactful, obviously. I mean, I just urge everybody to read a lot of history and read about, if you want like anchors, places that are like anchors, read about Sicily, the history of Sicily. And the multiculturalism that went on there was then repeated in many other places. I suppose Malta was the same. But during the Muslim era, the Islamic era, North Africa, Spain, and then all the way into China, really going all the way from the Pyrenees, Gibraltar, and then all the way to China. The Muslim impact was fantastic. And also there was such a back and forth of cultures and trade and wars and crazy people and all that history of the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages. It's really, oh boy, interesting to see these towers. They're almost minarets, and they probably were at some point. Ah, look at this. We're the classicists. This is for you. We're the Palladians with a center pier on the arch. Hey, Gewalt, who would ever do something like that? So somebody here was talking about Dubrovnik, which is where all this is, in Granada. I don't see why we can't go to Granada, but you know, I'd love to hear what people have to say about, can somebody say something about Granada, please?
Can I ask, please, if anyone has any question about the film, so I know that, and also I will leave the link so you can share it with your friends. I leave it for, until Monday, or the password, so you can share it with your friends if they want to see the film.
Thank you. It was really very, very moving. And I also got very moved around the Passover thing. And I realized that there are so many layers to tradition. We talk about tradition professionally because it's part of how we do our work. But the traditions that are handed down within cultures are one thing. And then you have the level of tradition, the type of tradition that you get directly from your family. So when Nili was describing her Passover and her grandmother at Passover and the table and everything, I recalled my grandfather and his table. And it really made me a little bit emotional because everybody has their little emotional points when it comes to these kind of personal, historic, traditional moments, so to speak, I suppose. Wow, I want to thank Nili, and I'm happy to continue the conversation for final comments.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, Nikos, how are you?
Yes. I want to ask Nili before she leaves.
I don't leave. I don't leave. Zalingaros, how are you?
Hello, Nili. Very well, thank you. I want Nili to state in very clear terms how we can build today with new materials in today's world, something that has the same feeling of life, connected to history, connected to the world, connected to the sacred. Because the faculties in Bezalel and Technion say it cannot be done. And of course, I disagree with that because Nili has done wonderful buildings in Israel. So please, Nili, what is the secret to building this beautiful connecting environment today?
Did you watch the film now? You had a chance, yes?
Yes, I've seen the film.
Yes. Well, my work in the last 40 years was really how to implement, this holistic, phenomenological school of thought, whatever you want, in practice. I mean, for me, that was the main thing beside the teaching. The people who use the buildings, that it is possible. I mean, if it was not possible, I mean, these whole discussions were useless. I think, the past for sure don't have any monopoly about beauty or places that you feel at home. There are places, in the past that don't have these feelings at all. And there are modern places, or that can have this feeling, and I think that the interface really between I don't only believe, because I tested it in practice, the pattern language and the interface between the patterns, these or others, with the site, as I showed you, with the right methodology, the way you work on the site, and you're really very aware about the forces that are acting on a specific site, not copy paste from every places. All of these obviously can create places that have very similar feeling that you have in traditional buildings, in some traditional buildings. As I say, not all traditional buildings have good feelings. I mean, so yeah, I think it's possible. I think it is very much possible. The thing is, Salingaros, you need the will to do it. This is the main thing. I mean, you really have to say, I'm not doing things just, for profit or making money. I want to create places that have a very, very good feeling and that people will feel at home, what we call timeless places, that people will want to come again and again, and not just, iconic architecture. So this is the first thing. I mean, what is the motivation? And I agree that, I mean, not all the people who practice architecture or any profession, not only architecture, they don't have this very genuine motivation. So I think this is, but otherwise, I really believe that it's possible. And, you know, I tried to do it. I mean, sometimes more successful, less successful, but not only me. I mean, there are also, and I think that, but I really believe that behind places that you really feel at home and has this sort of, you know, emotional experience and all of that, it's science. I mean, it doesn't come from sort of, you know, the vision of the architect and all. I mean, you really have to be very aware what generates these places, and that's it. So absolutely, I think that you can do it.
Precisely, Nili, please. The toolbox, you say you need the motivation, yes, but the toolbox, because no student today has the toolbox to design such wonderful places.
I agree, but you know, I mean, but you can do it. I mean, I was teaching for 20 years, and this is what I did. You know, I really taught him, you know, I gave them other tools than maybe other, and I tried my best, you know, and but I really think as a linguist that the theory is not enough. I mean, because you see, for people to adopt it and to go on with it, they really have to practice it. They really have to judge it for themselves and see the relevance of it. Because if not, okay, let them go to other options. I mean, you know, we don't have to, if you, no. And it's like this with everything, you know. This is what my Buddhist teacher, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, says. You know, I mean, you really have to test it for yourself, to see if it's relevant, to analyze it, to experience it, and that's it. But I agree. I mean, it's very rarely taught in the schools of architecture. Believe me, I mean, I know. And also when you get students like, I was teaching 3rd, 4th, and 5th year, I get them, first you have to shake them to get rid of all the bullshit, you know, that they got before. But slowly, I mean, it's education, but what can you do? I mean, it's in any profession, you know, I mean, not only in architecture, but so each one of us individuals have to promote these tools, and hopefully, you know, maybe one day more. I mean, it's only education, that's it. I mean, yeah, so
that was really great, Nili. Two people I think raised their hands, or I'd like them to speak, please. One is Lucien. Lucien is probably the greatest living urban design teacher, and he in a semester can pull people and have them design and build models, very convincing models of completely authentic fabric. And it's all traditional. So the so-called toolkit that you're talking about has been in existence for 2,500 years. Alexander didn't know it. He was looking at things, not knowing what he's looking at. And he actually is architecturally illiterate because he doesn't read the architecture. So he starts making patterns. Really, guys, be real for a moment. So, Lucien, what do you teach your students and how do you do it? And after that, Ulrich Becker, please.
Oh, okay. I didn't raise my hand, so, but you're forcing my hand.
I'm forcing you because they're saying you need tools, and I know that you don't teach this stuff.
No, I would like to have a low profile here, you know. Anyway, with my students, I would just kind of listen to them, and I'm not really giving great series, and I'm not really talking about science, and I mean, some way, you know, when I kind of teach, I would say it's poetry, which is more important than reason, because I think that reason and rationality has done so much damage. So I would just say, you know, follow your guts, you know, kind of really go into a place. what's very important for me would be to walk the place, to see the place, to explore the place, and to really get, and I think that's something very much Alexander would do, Christopher Alexander would do, just go and get the feeling of the place. But unlike Christopher Alexander, I don't think that just looking at the place and putting, like stalking out, marking out areas where you think that there's centers and so on. So I'm not mystical enough. So I would really have to rely on different type of evidence, maybe visual, maybe geographic, maybe some type of historical. I like to look at historical maps, to look at the passes and structures which kind of exist already, and also the locations of, like Aldo Rossi would do, look at the locations of public buildings or sacred buildings which are layered throughout thousands of years. You kind of find the sacred centers, they never change. So you have the centers more or less like telluric, I would say, permanence. I don't know what you call it. And also what I do with my students, I start to work on projects. When we met, Near and myself, the first time we met was in Portugal, in Viseu, when we had a news program with José Conillo da Silva. And we had first-year students, and they were 18 years old or 19 years old, and they came from rural backgrounds. And we started to teach architecture with the project. That's something I liked about Aldo Rossi. He said the project is analysis and synthesis. So you're not kind of starting with theory or with code or with treatises, but you're starting to work directly, phenomenologically, experientially with designing places. You just say, okay, what is the place you would like to design? And you kind of find the place that you design it. And Neil has seen the work. We had work, and it was first-year students doing work. And I think they were not able to explain it maybe, but they were completely involved. And what happens, which was so great, is they have involved the whole family. So the whole family was working on the projects. So I had this whole Portuguese families building models, because I asked them to build models with real material. So I did a village and buildings, one at a big scale, and I couldn't speak Portuguese, so I had to kind of do like sign language. And I asked them we looked at the buildings of the historical center, and then we kind of did some type of permutation, and we designed new buildings based on not even on the analysis, but just based on the imitation of the buildings which we experienced. And then they brought this project home, and then the whole family worked on the project. So it was collective work. My teaching was mostly also conversational. I mean, I like the conversation we have here, because that's the way I was working with my students, just talking to them and listening to them and kind of working with their own experience. Work was done, drawing, discussion, and a lot of improvisations, a lot of experimentations, which I think often my classical colleagues think that that's not necessary, because you have Vitruvius and you have this guy and you have that guy, so you don't need to experiment. But I think experimentation, discovery, and newness is important, because it's an evolutionary need. We need also to have new things, and the new things it doesn't mean that you have to reject all the things which have been before. And I mean, in some way, I'm kind of agreeing with Andres. It's all with Mark Hewitt, you have to layer new experiences on the kind of knowledge you have already. So, but you cannot eliminate experimentation, discovery, newness, and originality as a discovery of the new things. Oh, thank you. Oh, wow, look at that. First day work.
Ladies and gentlemen, the classical method is holistic. So with very little explanation. Anybody can understand it intuitively. This Lucien produced in a semester with students who were first-year kids, 18, 19, didn't know
No,
the
this
first
was not
thing
a
about
semester.
architecture.
This was like 2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay? You're
Yeah.
talking here, ladies and gentlemen, you're talking here about information and knowledge and a very, very efficient system for dealing with information and knowledge. No jibber jabber, no theory, no bullshit, no nothing. Here, there's not a single item here that's not buildable and that would not be pleasant.
Something also interesting here. So every student built a model. And then I think I was talking with Mehafi and Nikos at that time. So we had like 20 students, we have 20 buildings, and we just assembled the buildings as streets, as squares, and in different. So with 20 different buildings, we could do hundreds of permutations, which were always different places, but the buildings were the same. So there was an incredible variety and richness in kind of exploring all the, and in some ways also something. So I was working by hand, that we were working like building models in paperboard and so on. But in some way there was also a possibility, and that was also something I learned from Nikos and Christoph Alexander and Michael Mehafi, to develop algorithms, so to develop also a mathematical language where you could in some way generate. So I never pursued that anyway, because I'm
Well,
not
actually, the mathematics of diversity is embedded in the order. Fundamentally, every single one of these buildings follows an order implicitly. You can, even in the fact that it is stripped, it's called design by deletion. And you still have the rhythm of the order in all of them. And therefore you have all that diversity implicit in it, because the moment, and this is the wonder, for example, of Georgian architecture, which is so pretty to look at. Actually, your brain somehow or other is completing the full temple facade in the Georgian architecture, even though all you see is a brick wall with white windows. There is something going on between the brain and the order, which is a very, very high level kind of process, which you cannot deal with it analytically, because it's like taking a cat and dissecting it and trying to put it together. It's not going to meow. So this is a genuine holistic system. It's based on very simple principles, about 13. You have no more than 13 principles that actually operate this system. And that's architectural literacy. My own parents were taught that in middle school in Romania, in primitive Romania. And people were taught that stuff back in the 30s, as late as the 1930s, after World War II was taken out of the curriculum. But I really want to, whether if you did this intuitively, you did this from your own thinking, it's really channeling stuff that is genuinely holistic. And actually it comes from Western metaphysics. Has anybody here heard of Western metaphysics? Nili, did you know that there's metaphysics in the West? Okay, and the metaphysics of the West, in one sentence, like you remember Rabbi Hillel, when this guy came and said, teach me everything, he said, only don't do unto your neighbor what you don't like to done to yourself, and the rest you can learn. So the whole Western metaphysics is that truth, goodness, and beauty is one thing. That, in fact, describes the entire universe. And you can work from there down to the details of every single one of these windows and doors and arches. So this is a dialogue that operates at the high level, at the medium level of what we're going to design it to look like, and at the lower level, how are we going to build it constantly. It's just one of the most, you heard these people talking about how satisfying it is to work, to do their work. That's one of the reasons. They're engaging the whole brain all the time. It's a beautiful system, and we have stopped learning it for ideological reasons. The 1960s, people missed it desperately and tried to reinvent the wheel. And it's like in the stories, you know, the Romans invented a wheel that didn't go backwards on a slope. It was square.
Yes, good evening. I just thought also that I'm a bit of an arc between Nili and Bertram. Of course, I was born in East Germany, in depressive East Germany, and now I'm living in Israel. And I was a bit more lucky than Bertram because I grew up in an older fishing village, and at some age I went to this East socialistic bloc. And I agree, if you live in a building like this, that is actually, you feel like a number. You just like, it's completely intentionally anti-individualistic, and you're a machine. You feel that the surrounding does not care for you or for humans, and often people behave back, I think, to such environments in such anti-human or careless way. But I just wanted to also to add to this issue with how we can get more of this very nice environment. And I think there's another issue more than teach people how to do it, because I agree. I studied in Israel 5 years architecture and 2 urban planning, and I never heard anything about it. I had to learn it in other places. But even if we would teach the students all of this, the system, the Israeli standards, the jurisdiction, everything would not allow you to do this. And it's a joke. People say that the old city in Jerusalem, the holy city, does not meet Israeli standard of today. You cannot repeat it. You cannot build it. It's not lawful. It would be illegal to build the holy city that everybody will pay tens of millions for a little apartment there. And I think this is another problem. I think each country has another level of this problem. And I'm also very jealous about the Americans and the new urbanists and the form-based code, and a level where the city has much more independence to decide these things. But for example, in Israel, we have a very centralized and very rigid system that you cannot change so fast, and you cannot do this even if you are a perfect architect and planner and you do great things. It will not meet the standards. And I have no solution for this. I just say that I just think there are many countries that have these old modernist jurisdiction or standards that have to be overcome. And as Andres Duani always says, to level the playing field, and then people will decide. And yeah, that's what I hope we will also get closer to level the playing field.
Everybody ready to go to sleep now?
I'm going to cook my dinner now.
Yet another wonderful day. I think that you have been a magnificent group of people. And if you need proof of that, you actually got Andres Duani. You pulled him out of his spot and brought him here. He had to express himself, even though tomorrow is his turn. He has a whole day tomorrow. So thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. It's really an honor to be involved and engaged with you and talk and listen. And anybody want to say a last word?
Thank you, Nir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do go to the planning and give as much as you can. We really want to grow and bring more of these to the world and do the right thing together with you. See you tomorrow. Thank you, Lucian. This was great. Thank you, Flavio. Thank you, Flora. Thank you, Nili. Thank you, Bill, for being there. Nikos, thank you so much for playing with us. Hello, Brian. Thank you,
tomorrow,
Anne.
everybody.
See you all.
Tomorrow.
Hasta mañana.
Hasta mañana. Hasta mañana.
Ruben, see you tomorrow.